Okay. All right. I know some of you might still be doing this, but I was hoping we'd have some kind of board, but I didn't even think about it. How did it go? How did it go? Failed? Pass? Now, failed? Now, there's a lot of factors. Some of you are still doing this, I apologize. I'm sorry I didn't make enough copies. I didn't realize there's this many people here. But you know, what's interesting is, what are some of the factors that affect the accuracy? What are some factors that affect the accuracy? He said the details. Sometimes it's the details that we forget. The numbers. Make sure you notify us within 30 days of any change of address, otherwise you're kicked out of the program. Right? And we make sure you notify us, otherwise you're going to get kicked out. And we forget the number of days, you know, and so it's really easy. Numbers are easy to forget because there's no context. There's no context to numbers, right? Unless it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, so that's easy. What else made it difficult? The noise. Very good. You couldn't hear very well. Yeah. You guys are so noisy. What else made it difficult? Yes. They never stopped. They just kept the whole thing. That was the direction, is to read the whole question. But isn't that kind of like how we talk? I mean, it wasn't extremely long, and the answer wasn't extremely long. It's just that when you're not prepared, some of you took notes. Now, if you're going to stop, wait, what's the address? Or what's the name of the street? With what kind of knife? And then, is that the kind of interpreter you want? Do you want your partner as your interpreter? No. Say, sorry, I don't want you as my interpreter. And another thing that might have made it difficult is maybe the pronunciation. We couldn't hear very well. Maybe somebody spoke with a heavier accent or a less accent or faster, or they paused at the wrong places. And there's many factors that affect our listening and our memory, and that's why we train. You just did consecutive interpreting. Congratulations. Some of you need training. Now, what we train at the university is note-taking techniques. And if I were going to write the question, I will write the address, the numbers, the name of the street, because I know I can't remember. And I probably would draw an arrow going to the right, and maybe a little D after the arrow, meaning past tense. Have you ever been? And then I probably would draw a box with a thing on top. Yeah, to the residence or house. And then I probably would draw a slash, and then I wrote the address, whatever, something Bradley Street. And I forgot the next, what was it? Oh, and then, right, and how do we write January 12th? I would probably write 1/12/ whatever the year is. And then T, is it 10 p.m.? Yeah, 10, maybe if it's in the evening, I write a P. And then I could, and then the answer, was there an answer? Oh, John had never invited me there before, so I probably would put John, because I won't remember. And then I probably would use a quotation mark with a line through it. Means he never asked me. Or maybe I use a question mark with a line through it, meaning negative, before. Maybe before I write a B and a 4. Or maybe a dot and a line, you know, meaning before. This is after. This is before. See, after, before. Yeah. Well, you got to know what you're writing. If you write it down and you go, what did I write? So before, after, and then probably the knife, I would just draw a knife. I would just draw the fastest knife I could because I have to be fast, yeah? So, and then, so these are the kinds of exercises we actually teach our students, and they can be 100% accurate, 100% accurate, if they've been trained. And if they learn note-taking. So the thing is that if you're using somebody, oh, it's okay, they just come all the time. They're so sweet. This interpreter's so nice. We just keep asking the same one back.
In fact, they even will call the client at home and remind them that, they have an appointment. And sometimes they go and pick them up and bring them over. I'm like, okay, now it's an ethical issue. But if you notice they don't have a pen and a paper, I would dare to say there's no way they can be accurate. Absolutely not. And if you don't mind them just summarizing in what they think is important material, then fine. But if they don't have a pen and a paper, I dare to say they are not being accurate. Absolutely not. Only trained interpreters, good interpreters, will carry a pen and paper and will actually use it. Unless, really, really short. But I think we all know what a good interpreter is and somebody who's not doing the job. And you don't hire people, I'm sorry, I know that its relationship is really important, but maybe we should encourage some of those interpreters that we're using to start taking some classes. You know what? I bet you would be really good if you took a class or two. At the university, we offer classes to non-UH students and to UH students. And we offer them in the evening, once a week, 4:30 to 6:45. We offer the techniques of interpreting, skills, simultaneous skills, note-taking techniques. We offer community interpreting to teach about the ethics. We offer medical interpreting. We have court interpreting. We have great classes. It's only $500 per one class instead of like $1,500. And we work through workforce development and for scholarships for interpreters who want to improve. So we're doing our best to try to open it up to train more people. And what I love to see in our classes are interpreters who tell me, I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never been trained. And I said, good for you. I'm so glad you're here because you care about the LEP speaker. You care more about them maybe than you do yourself. So to me, let's encourage people who you think have potential, may have bilingual skills, but they may not know the ethics or have the interpreting skills. So let's work together in improving the interpreting on the sign, and that'd be awesome. Okay, now, what is the interpreter's role and what isn't the interpreter's role? What isn't the interpreter's role? Anybody? Two? What isn't the interpreter's role? Huh? To be a friend, to be an advocate, to pick them up at home. To coach what to say. I think you should say this. I think you should sign here. And sometimes we don't know what they're doing, but we know they're doing something that I just don't know. If they're doing something that I don't know, they're saying something that I don't know, then maybe we should stop them. And I'll teach you how. It's really fun when you get control of your own interview. Okay, so what isn't the interpreter's role? It's not to comfort. It's not to advocate. It's not to coach. It's to interpret. So the role, we say, is to facilitate direct communication between the provider, which would be you or people under you, and the LEP individual. We are there to just help them communicate directly. So there's a provider, there's an LEP, and they're supposed to communicate directly. And if I'm communicating directly, and I'm sorry, what's your name? And Natalie? Okay, if I'm trying to talk to Natalie, she's my client, I'm not going to say, hey, could you ask Natalie, how long she's been in America? Because now my communication is with him. My direct communication is with my interpreter. That's not how it should be. I should communicate directly with my client, and the interpreter should just stay out of it. That's why we tell them, you should sit a little bit behind. You should sit a little bit off. Up here, I was standing right in the middle because there's nowhere to sit. But usually, we won't be right in the middle. So we'll kind of be off to the side, and all they hear is our language, our voice, because our voice, so if he says, hi, how are you today? The interpreter should say, hi, how are you today? The interpreter shouldn't say, I'm fine. What about the client? Oh, he wants to know how you are. No. It's all, we're there to help them talk directly as if we weren't there at all. Okay, so we need these three skills. Skills, ethics, and knowledge. This is the competence. I'm going to talk about ethics a little bit. And this is this is nationwide code of ethics. So good interpreters should know these and actually use these. The first one is accuracy, and I think you have these. This is a handout. And so one of your handouts actually has this. And this is kind of fun for interpreters. It gives us the right to do a lot of stuff that we normally don't do. For example, We convey the message and the tone of the speakers accurately and completely without adding or deleting anything. We don't add. If you say, how are you today? And then the person goes, 你今天怎么样？我想他的意思就是你的家人怎么样，你怎么样？你可以告诉他你最近的痛苦啊，你说 something is wrong, right? You say, wait a minute. Did you just add something? All right, so we're not supposed to add. And if the client or somebody is upset, we're supposed to be upset. If you want to be firm with your person, like I told you, you need to come to every meeting. The interpreter needs to say, 我告诉你，你每一次都要到达。Do you understand? 你了解吗? We need to have that tone that you're portraying. If you're really nice, then fine. But sometimes you need to be firm. And sometimes But anyway, we're supposed to convey the message in tone. Now, interpreters will accurately interpret obscenities and sexual terminology and maintain composure while interpreting an emotionally charged situation. So this is what we teach our interpreters. If they say a bad word, you need to say it. We can't say, oh, he said he's not too happy. No, if he says something, we're supposed to find an equivalent and say it. I know you're not. I know it's not me saying it, And this happens all the time, like in the courtroom. What did he say before he hit you? What did he say before he hit you? Oh, I can't tell you that. I can't say it in this courtroom. There's people here. No, you've got to say it. Okay. And then he says it, and we get to say it. When else can we, curse in front of a judge? It's fun. So interpreters have a lot of fun with this one. Another one, interpreters will seek clarification when needed. Now, this shows professionalism. If I'm trying to be accurate, sometimes I need to clarify. Okay, for example, Section 8 housing says that, the interpreter has to come, and then you have to come. Excuse me. The interpreter would need to hear you repeat that question again. Yeah, because I just didn't hear. It might have been a noise. It might have been, excuse me, the interpreter would like to hear the question repeated. You see how I'm calling myself the interpreter? Yeah, because that's professionalism. I'm no longer the client. If they say, and you turn and you say, wait a minute, I didn't understand. Well, is that the client saying I didn't understand or the interpreter? So if it's the interpreter, we should say, excuse me, the interpreter needs clarification. What did you mean by Okay? So that's how we do it. And another one, Code of Ethics. Oops. I think there's one more on your paper, and that's if there's miscommunication, we actually can say something to you and let you decide what to do. Now, the confidentiality is hard because our ethics talk about keeping things confidential. So if you're using a family member for confidential things, the family member is, how can they keep things confidential when they are the advocate or the family member or the friend? So there's something to think about. Anyway, they need to maintain confidentiality in all assignment-related information. If you ask somebody, are you married, they say no, and I know from before they said yes, I can't say anything. That's not my job. My job is just to interpret, as an interpreter. All right? The next one is impartiality. Interpreters shall refrain from accepting an assignment when professional skills, family, or close personal or professional relationships affect impartiality. So if I can't remain neutral because I know this person, then I really shouldn't interpret. If I'm their advocate, it's really hard for me to interpret because I'm going to want to give them advice. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? So it's hard to ask someone who's an advocate to interpret. That's why it's hard to ask a social worker when they show up, could you interpret, please? Maybe it's okay for names and addresses and simple information, but when it comes very sensitive things, we really should have an impartial interpreter. And you can imagine why. Not long ago, an attorney asked me to translate what I heard on a tape. And the tape, and just being honest with all of you, the tape was a policeman asking somebody what happened. There's a robbery. And they were using their daughter to interpret because she happened to be there. And she spoke English and a little Chinese. The problem is her Chinese wasn't that good. And so when she was interpreting, and this is the hunch that the attorney had, when she was interpreting, she would leave out stuff that he said, that the father said, that there's no way the policeman would ever have known that. So that's the problem sometimes of using, kids or someone who doesn't have any skill, who have never been trained. Okay, so an interpreter shall reveal any relationship with the party that might be perceived as a conflict of interest. Yeah, and as a social worker, maybe you've been asked to interpret, you may want to say, well, you know, I am their social worker, so I am going to be impartial. I just want you to know that. So I'll interpret, but I'm going to be partial. I'm not going to be impartial. The interpreter shall demonstrate respect toward all persons involved in the interpreting situation and will act in a manner that is neutral and unbiased and culturally sensitive. So we teach that as well. All right. The next one is our role boundaries, what we can and what we can't do. And the first one is interpreter will maintain proper role boundaries, avoiding all unnecessary contact with the parties during and outside the interview situation. And you know, normally if you get up and leave as a provider, I'll be back. Sometimes our interpreters will get up and stand outside the door because they don't want to be left alone in the room. Because what will happen is that the client will start talking to them and give them information they don't want to know. Please don't tell me, tell him. And so, or tell her. And so sometimes they'll stand up and wait out by the door, sometimes, and often. But they shouldn't be carrying on a conversation. I was visiting housing once, and I was at the housing application office. I was really impressed with their knowledge of how to work with an interpreter. Because an interpreter would show up at the window, and then the client, the applicant was also outside at the window, and sometimes they know each other, sometimes they're just the same language, they start talking. And they will actually ask the interpreter to come inside. And then when the client is done with the interview, they ask the interviewee to go ahead and leave, and they ask the interpreter to wait. And after the interviewee leaves, then the interpreter can leave, you know, whatever they signed their timesheet or something. So that's really good because they know how not to put an interpreter in a situation that we don't want to be in. At least professionally trained interpreters don't want to be in. So we really appreciate the knowledge that they have. Okay, the next one. The interpreter shall use first-person speech to help facilitate as much direct communication as possible. And we were just demonstrating that, first-person speech. And if somebody says to you, oh, she says this, he says that, you can just stop them and say, excuse me, can you just use first person? I mean, just say it the way they say it. If she says, I am hungry, you say, I am hungry. Don't say, she said, okay? And you just kind of help train them. Thanks. Make my job easier. Everybody trained. Interpreters shall not interject personal opinions or give counsel or advice to individuals to whom they are interpreting. And so if your interpreters that you're using start doing this, you may want to have a copy of this on file and say, excuse me, I'm going to go get something. And just go get the Code of Ethics and say, you know, I thought maybe you would want this. And then you call the agency that you're using and say, hey, this interpreter doesn't know the Code of Ethics. They're carrying on conversations. They picked the person up at home. They did this. You need to train this person. And put that responsibility on those language service providers, because that really is their responsibility of who they hire. Make sure that they're trained and qualified. Okay? Professionalism. The interpreter will arrive punctually at the appointed location, dressed appropriately. It's very important. And if not, make a note. The other one is the interpreters, when hired by an agency, should not propagate their own business. We have a lot of interpreters who are part-time realtors, part-time interpreters, part-time salesmen, and they end up handing out their card to a client. That's so weird. That is so not right. They're not supposed to propagate their own business or even give out their own cards unless it's asked and it's actually a company card, maybe their provider card. Okay, and they're not supposed to take tips, of course. Although, you know, okay, I'll tell you stories later. Okay, interpreters will accurately represent their certification training experience. If they say, hey, I'm a certified interpreter, well, you're going to ask, certified in what? Lawn mowing? I'm sorry, certified in what? I didn't think there was that many certified interpreters on the island. So you can just ask them, certified in what? How did you get certified? Yeah, and you know, just because maybe they don't know that they're not certified. After today, you'll all be certified interpreters. Isn't that great? That's what some interpreters think. After this 1 hour, you know, you'll be certified. And so there's a lot of misconception about what certification is. Okay, and interpreters shall participate in continuing education programs when available. And another code of ethics is interpreters will seek evaluative feedback in order to improve their performance. So you may want to ask them, do you want some feedback on your performance today? If they say, oh, not really, well, I know I'm going to give it to you anyway because this is your code of ethics. Or at least give somebody, yeah. And okay, finding the right interpreter. We'll let you read that on your own. Meow, squeak. All right. Finding the right interpreter for the client. Okay, our goal is to ensure that the client is able to express themselves as if they were speaking their own language. As if, so that's our goal. And if they can't express themselves as if they were speaking a native language, then maybe we need an interpreter. Now, I think a lot of you have this notification set up already, the language notification, and you can just show them. Do a lot of you have that in your offices? Or you can ask your frontline staff, do you have this? Because sometimes they'll come to our window or whatever, and we won't really know what language. And on here, there is a difference between, most of us, there's a difference between Cantonese and Mandarin, because the oral language is different. So it has both of those. So you'll need that. The next one is you want to assess the client's need. So what level of English proficiency is needed? All they need to do is fill out a form with their name and address. They may be able to do that without an interpreter. Maybe you don't need an interpreter. So it depends on what you need. And then that will determine if you need an interpreter. What level of English proficiency does the client have? And so it has to match. So we've divided this. Some of you know Du Kaneshiro. She came up with this. This is really easy and simple. But there are 3 levels of language, basically. Okay? One is the elementary fluency. And that means they're able to piece together words, some phrases, and that they're, respond to very basic yes-no questions. And another one is conversational fluency. They're actually able to carry on informal conversations using simple sentences and basic vocabulary. And that's the tricky part. Because a lot of us see this, and we hear them carrying on a conversation, and we think that they're actually a narrative level when actually they're not. So a narrative level is able to fluidly describe events, articulate abstract ideas, and express emotions. Now, the question is, what's the client's level? Well, are they elementary? You can ask, where were you born? Maybe they can tell you. What's your address? They can tell you that. A basic conversation, how did you learn English? Maybe they can tell you, oh, I took classes. What kind of job do you do? I'm a cook. But a narrative is more like, can you tell me about what happened the day that you were evicted? Can you tell me about what happened the day of the incident? Well, then they're going to start having trouble if they're not at the narrative level. Now, what level do they need? Do you only need simple, straightforward facts from them? If so, then maybe elementary or basic conversational is good enough. You don't need an interpreter. But if they need to describe events, what happened, articulate abstract ideas, express emotions, respond to complex questions, then maybe you need them to have a narrative level of English. And if they don't have a narrative level, you're going to have to find an interpreter who has a narrative level. So we match the interpreter with the client's needs. Okay, these two don't match. Okay, one is speaking music. I don't know whether. Okay, so we need to match not just the language, but the dialect. You have to think about that. If you say Visayan, what does that mean? You speak Visayan. Well, you don't know. Maybe it's Cebuano. Maybe it's Ilonggo. So sometimes you have to investigate further. They say Chinese. Every Chinese can say, I speak Chinese. That doesn't help me, okay? Is it Mandarin? Is it Cantonese? Yes. No, that's not a yes-no question. It's an or question. All right, so we have to find the dialect, and the subject or the topic area is very important as well. Is it going to be legal? Is it actually a hearing? Is it what is it? So then are there conflicts of interest? The smaller communities, the more they know each other. So you have to make sure there's no conflict of interest, especially if it's a serious meeting. And then there's cultural factors involved. Just like the lady who interpreted, the girlfriend of the man who saw who wrote down that he saw the stabbing, she had a conflict of interest. It was her son who did the stabbing, okay? So that was an obvious conflict of interest, but it really happened. It still happened because of the language issue, I think, we don't know. So anyway, and then there's cultural factors, all right? Like there's some people, there's some political factors among some languages. Like like Ukrainian and Russian. Some Ukrainians speak Russian, they don't want to. and opposite, things like that. So anyway, okay. So finding the interpreter. One, can you just use a bilingual staff? Well, maybe they're untrained, but maybe to get basic information, that's all you need. Another one, maybe telephone or remote or video remote. And some of you have the video remote, but the telephone is very easy. We can pick it up. The problem with the telephone is you need to understand the interpreter's point of view. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And then there's face-to-face. Now, what are the advantages of face-to-face versus telephone? If you have a document to read to them, good luck. Telephone can't do it. And if you read it with very difficult grammar, it's still going to be very difficult for them to read. So if you have sight translation, telephone is not the way to go. And you shouldn't just say, okay, well, why don't you take this home, have somebody read it to you, and then bring it back and it's signed. Yeah. Then you're putting the burden on them, and that's not what the law says we should do. Okay, so obviously there are advantages to face-to-face. You know that a lot of the Micronesian languages uses facial expressions. And like Marshallese, you know, they drive me crazy because when I was training in the Marshall Islands and I'm saying, okay, so how many, so you are all, so none of you have had interpreter training, is that right? You know, and they're like, and I'm like, well then, and I take the eyebrow thing to me, when actually it meant yes, to the eyebrow, you know. That's like us nodding our head like this. Okay, now on the phone you can't see that, and they naturally do it. You know, we do this, right? And they go. They don't go. You know. The point is, I thought I had to ask like 3 times. I'm like, why isn't anybody answering me? Why are they being like this? And it was a lack of a cultural understanding. So sometimes we get. Now, if we had an interpreter, that'd be great. But okay. So ad hoc interpreters, let's talk about them. We can get them from the community, friends, neighbors, bilingual staff, friends and family members, and that's what we call ad hoc interpreters. Those are usually untrained interpreters. But when we're screening an interpreter to see if they're good for this, we really should screen. You can ask the interpreter's background. You can you tell them, you can say, hey, can you tell me a few code of ethics? What are some of the codes of ethics that an interpreter should have? And see if they even know them. You can even get them to sign it. So I gave you the code of ethics. Maybe on the other side you put, I promise to abide by these code of ethics, and have them sign it. Some people do that. You can also set ground rules. Okay, so if you have a question, if they're saying something you don't understand, just ask me. Say they're saying something that you don't understand, and I will let you clarify. You may set ground rules, maybe seating, maybe where they're going to sit. Maybe how long you're going to speak, etc. All right, here's an example of an interpreter certification. And it says, you know, I certify that I've read and understand the Code of Ethics, dated blah, 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 and that I will abide by the provisions of the code and all, whatever. You can just make it up. It doesn't matter. The point is that you want them to read the Code of Ethics. So if you're using a family member and they promise to abide by the Code of Ethics, they've already broken the Code of Ethics by, you know, they have a conflict of interest, so don't make them sign something. Because they're not going to keep it. They've already broken it. Okay, so another thing is maybe a post-session evaluation. You may want to write down your evaluation of the interpreter for the agency and for future reference. This interpreter was very professional, skilled, trained. And you write it down, language, name. And maybe the next time you call the agency, we want somebody like this interpreter. They were very, very good for our purposes. And maybe you tell the staff worker, hey guys, this is really good. So if you hear of something, why not make a suggestion? Sometimes we're like, oh, we always call the same person, and you know, I don't know why, I don't know. But you can ask. I know that, I'm not sure, maybe you can ask this question of whoever your bosses are. Do you have to call the same agency? Can you try a different agency? Can you try a different interpreter? Are you bound by what they have, you know, decided before you? So you may want to ask that. I don't know the answer to that, but okay. So I'm assuming you're not bound. It's just money, right? You just spend money. So I don't know. But anyway, part 4, practical aspects. Okay, we're going to run to this. 1, use shorter sentences, especially if you're using an untrained interpreter. Okay, it would be better if you kind of paused, because all of you had that experience, right? If they paused, maybe you could get it. But use shorter sentences, maybe pause frequently, allow the interpreter to convey the information quickly and accurately. Good interpreters don't need to pause. I might say, yeah, just keep going. Don't stop there. Have you ever been to the house of, and there's some people, I'm like, just read the sentence, I'm fine. I take notes, I'm fine, Okay, and then ask only one question at a time. Too many questions at the same time may require additional clarification by the interpreter or even by the listener. So usually we ask one question at a time. That's really important. Another one is practice pointers. Ask customers to repeat key information and check for understanding. Rather than say, do you understand? You might want to say, well, tell me what you need to do before our next meeting. Tell me what you think our conclusion is. Do you know how many days you have to inform me if you change your address? Do you know? So check for understanding. This always helps you know whether or not they get it. It may not be the interpreter's issue. It may just be a lack of literacy. It may be a lack of understanding, like a lot of other countries don't have some of the services we provide, and they just are so foreign to these services that you may just want to check that anyway. Okay? Another one is understand the interpreter's role. Facilitate direct communication with the LEP individual directly. Know that they should be accurate, they should be confidential, impartiality. Know these 5 major code of ethics yourself. Then you can help them. Take steps to help the interpreter maintain their role. And then enforce the interpreter to stay in the role. Excuse me, could you please interpret like everything they just said? I really don't want you to summarize. Excuse me, if you don't have a conversation, could you just interpret? And then if they have questions, I will answer the questions. So sometimes we embarrass the interpreter and it makes them, and then we give them here's a Center for Interpretation and Translation Studies. Maybe you could take a class or two. My goal is to get everybody trained, then we'll all be happy. Okay, so make sure you stay in control. And sometimes interpreters like to hijack the conversation and the interview, but make sure you stay in control. Be alert for possible problems with the interpreter of accuracy or of the interpretation, and appropriately address issues as soon as possible. Tell them, please avoid side conversations. Don't ask the interpreter to explain what's happening. And just you explain, and they can interpret. Treat the interpreter with, courtesy and respect their time, but also pay attention to the interpreting. If the interpreter appears to be summarizing or explaining or is having a conversation with the LEP person, you can say, you can remind them. Please, I like to remind you to interpret everything that is said. Interpret everything that they say. Interpreter, please interpret. Sometimes they're sitting there looking at you, and then you have to say, excuse me, interpreter, please interpret. Especially if you're paying them to do that. Okay, things to watch for. Interpreter summarizes. Interpreter uses third-person speech. She said, he said. Interpreter stops. Is there something wrong? Or the interpreter hesitates or stumbles. Or interpretation is shorter than the statement being interpreted. How many family members in your family? 你的家人有几个人？也包括你的那个阿姨他们是什么人？好像你就是住在你家里，到底有几个？啊，是吗？哦，3. And you're like, no, wait a minute. I'm sorry. What was that conversation you were just having? Could you please interpret everything? And try not to have a conversation because I have no idea what you're saying. So stay in control. Interpreter can't understand you, maybe. That's a red flag. Like, sorry, what? Sorry, what? Or interpreter looks confused. Or what's worse, even the client looks confused. Yeah. But if the interpreter looks confused, it's like, oh. Okay. You may even have to reschedule the appointment with a more competent interpreter, depending on the critical outcomes of what you're meeting, of what you're talking about. Now, the availability of interpreters. I would strongly recommend you collaborate, you build a pool of qualified and ethical interpreters with the subject matter knowledge. And you can always say, like I said, you can always say, let's don't use this interpreter anymore. I don't want them. And say to the agency, I don't want them. Because they need to be more than just a second language speaker, right? You're paying them. Why not get a good interpreter? So, and there's a lot of good interpreters out there. All right, now, did you all do your true-false questions? I see some of you changing your answers. Yeah. I'm only going to go over a few of these. For example, 1, interpreting and translation mean the same thing. True or false? False. Number 2, a client who has conversational fluency in English does not need an interpreter. False. If you need a narrative answer, then you're going to need an interpreter for somebody who only speaks fluent conversational English. 3, a person who is bilingual should be able to interpret. False. They need skills and background knowledge. Yeah. A good interpreter interprets word for word. Actually, it's meaning for meaning. It's not really word for word. There may not be a word for arraignment. You know, there may not be a word for a particular technical term that you use in your agencies that we just don't have in undeveloped languages. English is a very developed language. And especially some of your agencies, even the English speaker like me, I don't even understand what terms mean. Right? Somebody has to explain it to me. So sometimes it's meaning for meaning rather than word for word, or chunk by chunk or phrase by phrase is probably a better way to say it. So that's actually a false statement. When you tell somebody, I want you to interpret word for word, I think what you mean is, I want you to interpret accurately. Don't add, don't omit. Yeah, okay? 5, friends and family members may interpret for an abused victim, provided they can remain neutral. False, because they can't remain neutral. There's no way they can remain neutral. This is horrible. They'd be an advocate. Okay, number 6. Most professional interpreters have been certified by a national certification of interpreters exam. False. There is no national certification of interpreters exam. There's a court exam, there's a medical exam, and they are limited in languages. So there's a lot of languages that don't even have an exam. So very few are certified, but they may be professional and they may be trained. 7, to help direct communication take place, the SP, the service provider, should always speak first to the interpreter and allow the interpreter to speak to the client. They should say, interpreter, please tell the client, I'm now going to ask him a few questions. Then the interpreter should say, he's now going to ask you a few questions. True, false? False. You should speak directly to the client. 8, at the beginning of the session, it's best to have the interpreter introduce the provider to the client. False. You should take control immediately. Oh, good morning. Are you Mr. Chang? Who don't? And then and behind me, I hear this interpreting. Oh, 你好，你是张先生吗? Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Mr. Jones. 很高兴认识你，我是 Jones 先生。Oh, 很高兴认识你。Oh, I'm happy to meet you. It should be like there's a voice somewhere. That should be the interpreter. Okay, so you should be the interpreter. Oh, this is going to be your interpreter today. You don't need to say names. I never introduce my name. I always say, hi, I'm your Mandarin interpreter for today. They have asked me to come and interpret. I don't need an interpreter. That's okay. They need an interpreter. I'm going to be there anyway. Oh, that's okay. She'll be here on standby. And because trained interpreters know that if they answer English, it's because you're speaking on a level that their English is okay. But once they get to a narrative level of questioning, their English kind of goes out the window, and they're going to go, well, I am, and they look at the interpreter, 你告诉他发生的事情, and all of a sudden they speak in their second language because they realize, oh, it's so much easier. And so that's our experience, over and over and over. So I'll just be on standby sometimes. You had a question? No? Okay, the interpreter should not take notes because it may make the client nervous. Okay, that's false. They should have a pen and paper. 10, in emotional settings, a client may go on and on and on and repeat herself a lot. In this case, the interpreter may summarize. False. What should the interpreter do? Switch to simultaneous or take very good notes. I would switch to simultaneous. 11, a good interpreter should never use a dictionary in the middle of interpreting. I carry a dictionary everywhere I go. And you know why I use it sometimes? My code of ethics tells me I need to be accurate. And if I don't know the term, I'm going to look it up. I will say, excuse me, the interpreter would like to look up a term that the client has just used. Or the interpreter needs to look up a term. And I'll just do it really fast. Yeah, so that is actually false. That's false. I need my dictionary. So if I need to use it, please let me use it because I want to be accurate. So that's false. 11 is false. In fact, so far, everything's false. 12, if a client speaks too long, the only thing the interpreter can do is ask the client to stop speaking and allow for interpretation. No, it's false. What can I do? Switch to simultaneous. Take good notes. What we find is that if we interrupt the speaker, they lose their train of thought. So we don't like to interrupt them. A good interpreter, 13, will simplify complicated or technical language to a level that the client can understand. You wish. I'm not going to do your job. You need to simplify the language. All I do is interpret. I keep the same register. Interpreters keep the same register. Yeah, we talked about that. I don't say deer. I don't translate it as Bambi, or something. So we are trained to keep the same register. So if the client says, excuse me, I don't understand, we turn and say, excuse me, I don't understand. Oh, well, you have to do the tier 3. You have to do the tier 3. What is tier? What is tier? And I'm just going between. So the two of you can talk. And so we don't simplify. We just keep the same level of language. So that's false. 14, if the culture allows, it's perfectly acceptable for the interpreter to help comfort the client by using maybe physical contact, such as touching the shoulder. False. The client should have the interpreter's telephone number in case the client wants to get a hold of the service provider later. False. Please don't let them call me at home. If they call me at home, they're going to want to ride. Then they're going to say, hey, my car insurance is wearing up. Could you call the company for me and extend my insurance? They're going to have me be their everything, okay? And then 16, if the interpreter feels one method of questioning is not getting me far, she may suggest another approach since she understands culture. False. I am not the professional. I've not been trained in what you've been trained in. So don't trust the interpreter. No, false. 17, if the client is not cooperating, it's best to ask the interpreter, what do you think's going on? You think they're lying? False, because the interpreter's going to say, I'm sorry, my code of ethics prevents me from giving my opinion. Or they're going to translate what you said. What, do you think my client's lying? Oops, I'm sorry. 18, the client has just been asked a question. The client turns to the interpreter and says, do you think I should tell the truth? The interpreter should say, yes, you should always tell the truth. False. If they say, do you think I should tell the truth, interpreter? I'm going to turn and say, do you think I should tell the truth, interpreter? I'm just like going back and forth, back and forth. That's all I'm doing. Okay, so that's false. 19, when the interpreter is alone with the client, perhaps arriving before the provider arrives, the interpreter should sit down, try to find out as much about the person's situation as possible. False. Avoid unnecessary contact. That's false. 20, the client accidentally says she was born in 1853 instead of 1953. The interpreter should interpret it 1853. True. This is the only true one in here. It's the only true of the whole thing. It's true. After an interpreting job, the client asks the interpreter for a ride to the bus stop. False. 22, the client says to this SP, oh, I'm not married. The interpreter knows she's been married. False. Okay, false, false, false. Only one true. Thank you. Now, we're going to have time for questions. And you can ask me or anybody. And there's there's a microphone somewhere. Any questions? You can keep the true-false questions. That's it. Yes, there's a question over here, and I'll repeat it because I don't know where the mic went to. Go ahead.
I work in a healthcare facility where sometimes we have an interpreter come to our window and to speak for the family that's come for a TB test. They don't understand English, they're limited, very limited. I speak to the patients, but the interpreter is the one standing in front of me, and she will answer for the family without even repeating what I say to the family. I have often told the interpreter, please ask the family these questions so I can know that they're understanding what I'm saying. Is there a way, is that the best way? Is there another way? how can I communicate to the interpreter that I need the answers from the family?
Very good. I don't know, well, first of all, I don't know if you have a telephone service, but this is where a telephone service would come in really handy. I have somebody in front of me, I have you on speakerphone, I'm going to ask this question, and then sometimes it's really quick, it's only 5 minutes, so that's really helpful. The other thing you could say is that, okay, where you sit or stand is important. Okay, Miss So-and-so, I want you to come right here, and you put them right in front of you. And so you look at them, so how old are you? And when you're looking at them, how old are you? It's hard, they may say 81. You can always say, are you 81? And then if no one interprets, oh, could you please interpret for me? Are you 81? And then eventually they kind of get the hint that, okay, everything they answer, you're gonna ask them if it's true. And sometimes they'll start switching. I like psychology. You kind of can work with people and you realize some things work and some things don't. One thing is just having them right in front of you. But another thing is just very natural. I mean, it's natural for kids to answer, she's 82, especially if they're older. And they've been doing this, you know, in America, everywhere they go. They answer for the grocery store. $5.85, Mom, $5.85, and it's just so common. So I would say you may want to check for understanding for important questions. Because it's hard to train a family member. It's just hard to train a family member. So maybe placement. That's a good question, though. Anybody else? Another question? I can't read minds. Sorry. Did you have a question? No? Like, oh, over here? Nice and loud. Okay, you're working for the state, you need an interpreter for a client on the phone. I'm positive, probably your language access coordinator, whoever that is, this is your homework. Go find out who your language access coordinator is, because every one of you have one probably. If they call on the phone, the easiest thing to do is get a telephone interpreter, and you do a 3-way call. I don't know if your phones allow it, but that's the fastest and the easiest way, and I'm almost positive that you have a plan, because Hawaii has signed some kind of Western agreement with a telephone company. So something like that is easy. If there's someone in your office who speaks, you could always have that happen. But is that true, Helena, probably? That there's probably a language access coordinator for every department, except maybe Honolulu City, for the state. And if not, and you really, I mean, if you have a budget and stuff and you want to find out, you know, more, you can always contact us and things. But I'm sure Helena's office can go find out who your coordinator is if you can't find that out yourself, right? They can call your office. Thank you. Somebody else? That's a very good question. Yes. Okay, that's a good question. He's talking about translating idioms. But actually, written translation is something that some of you may want to consider. If you are using, I'm kind of saying something first, and then I'll answer your question. Written translation is something that a lot of you are already started to do because you're working with constituents or your clients speak a second language. And I think the law says if at least 5% of your clients speak one language, you're supposed to have a lot of vital documents, most important documents, translated into those languages. And it's just easier on you. So you may want to budget, you may want to write for grants and say, next year I want to translate these documents. Now if you want to do 14 languages, it's going to cost a lot. But you can start with maybe the top languages and get written translations done. Now as for idioms, we do meaning for meaning, not word for word. If it's raining cats and dogs, I'm not going to say in Chinese, the cats and dogs are falling. They're going to go, oh. You know what I'm saying? But I am going to say something that means it's raining really, really hard. Does that answer your question? Yeah, okay. Other questions? Yes. That's an excellent question, and I'm going to try to find out the answer. What do you do if you have a feeling the interpreter is just not doing a good job? First of all, trust your feeling. Because almost anyone with a little training, can tell an interpreter's not doing a good job because you're actually paying attention. So what I would do, there's a couple things. One is, well, this is kind of weird, but I do this. I say, do you mind if I record this conversation for my sake? And you may want to ask somebody, or you may want to ask the company, is it okay if we record interpreting? Not for confidentiality's sake, but just to find out if this interpreter is doing a good job. And in fact, we'll send it to you, the company. And you tell me, was it accurate? That's one thing. I don't know, I'm making this up because there's really no one way to do it. But I just want to say you should trust yourself. And if it's critical enough, I would say, let's continue this at another time. Now, what immigration office does, the immigration office, if someone brings an interpreter, even if they're professional, they will call a company, get them on the phone, and they let them sit there and say, if the interpreter is making an error, can you please let me know and correct the error? And they do that all the time. That's how critical the outcome of some immigration office meetings are. And they will have someone on the phone. And yeah, so that's interesting. So you may want to think about that. But I think you have to think about how crucial is this meeting and how crucial is the interpreter. And then, again, if you need to postpone something, just postpone. Okay, you know what? I'll be back. And maybe you go and talk to a supervisor. Is it okay if we have them come back with another interpreter? And we're going to ask for another interpreter. Yeah. Be strict on interpreters, because I'm trying to force them to get better training. Yeah, so I think that's a good idea. Okay, good question. And I'm sorry if I didn't answer. I'm trying. Somebody else? Ten, 9, 8, 7. Has this been helpful? Yes. Very good. Okay, so I think what we'll do is I'll send my PowerPoint out, and I think all of you are on some kind of list. Is that true? And if you don't get it, just write to me directly. Oh, wait. Ta-da. Oh, thank you. Oh, okay, that's thank you. And there we go. Okay, so this is my contact, and feel free to contact me. And yeah, and if you don't hear from me, send it again, and then we'll get you that PowerPoint. If you don't get it in the next day, how's that? Give me a few days. Thank you very much, and thank you, Office of Language Access.
Okay, stay put. We want you to fill out evaluation. But I just wanted to remind people, Becky's presentation earlier showed you some resources on our website. And if you have any questions, feel free to call us. Every office has different resources in terms of contracted providers or fee-for-service interpreters, but we're happy to help bridge. Okay, thank you. And here's Denise. Thank you again for the city and county for hosting.
Thank you, everyone. If you would fill out your evaluations and bring them to the tables that are out in front where you registered and leave them there. And otherwise, thank you very much for being here and for participating.